I was camping in the middle of nowhere in Washington near Mount Rainier. Like not an official campground, just way out in the forest, where I wouldn't have expected another human for miles. One night, I wake up and hear something outside my tent. I open my tent, and there's a guy sitting by where my fire had been right outside my tent. Nothing particularly noteworthy about the guy, just a fairly regular looking dude, just sitting there a couple feet from my tent. No bag, or pack, or anything with him. Just a guy. He saw me open the tent, and his eyes got huge, like he had just seen a ghost, and he took off. It shook me up pretty badly, but over the next day, I managed to put it out of my mind fairly well, after writing it off as just some odd occurrence, and a guy that was probably high or something, and had somehow managed to set up camp, coincidentally not far from mine. Then 2 days later after that, and 10 to 15 miles away, in totally random directions that nobody could take the same path as me on accident, I was sitting by the fire that night, and started hearing noises that I got more and more convinced were a person. I called out to them, and out of the darkness someone was like, "Do you know how to get to Bell's Canyon?" I said no, I don't even think that's a real place there. They kept talking from just out of my line of vision. I tried to see them with my flashlight, but they yelled, "Aim that away!" And I kind of got spooked, and not wanting to piss off a potentially crazy person, I did. After like 15 minutes of me being freaked out, and them talking and asking completely random questions from the darkness, it sounded like the voice had gotten closer, so I shined my light that way again, and it was the same dude who had been outside my tent 2 nights before. He had to have followed me almost 15 miles over 2 days, because there's no way he could have just accidentally wound up in the same spot as me. No possible way. As soon as my light hit him, he took off again. I started to chase him, but didn't want to get lost in the wilderness in the dark, so I stopped quickly after probably only 100 or 200 feet. This one couldn't be written off, because the only way he could have been in both places is specifically if he was following me. I decided the trip was very over first thing in the morning, and hiked back out over 3 days, constantly doubling back, trying to throw anyone following me off my trail, and occasionally hiding and waiting to see if he would come by following me. I really can't describe how terrifying it was to feel like I was being hunted through the woods, and to actually have to brainstorm on things I could do to best avoid potentially being murdered. On the first night of hiking out, twice I heard what sounded like a person walking circles outside my tent, but by the time I mustered the courage to look, nobody was there. On the second night, I heard what I thought was an animal making noises in the distance, but slowly decided it sounded more like a human mimicking animal noises, but could have actually been an animal, but I didn't actually see the guy again. But it really sounded like a person making howling noises. I literally almost cried when I finally got back to my car. The relief was so strong. To this day, it's probably the most terrifying experience I've ever had. I have no idea who the guy was, or what his intentions were, and no way of getting an explanation, but I really can't articulate just what a terrifying few days it was. A few years back, my girlfriend and I, having hiked several other parts of the Appalachian Trail, decided we wanted to give the southern portion of Virginia's trail a shot. It's about 166 miles long, and runs through George Washington and Jefferson National Forests, from Roanoke County to Pearisburg and Giles County. This is definitely one of the more remote and less traveled parts of the trail, which is exactly what we were looking for. We gathered our gear and made our way to the start of the Virginia Creeper Trail to begin our journey. We had planned our journey to end at Damascus, and figured that by the time we got there, we would be more than ready to get home to our own beds. It was early October, and changing of the leaves and the colors were amazing. The air was crisp and cool, perfect hiking weather with beautiful scenery. The majority of the trip was pretty uneventful, just your typical hike, but our last couple of nights is where things got weird. On this portion of the trail, you're supposed to camp on the trail or a designated shelter. We didn't really want to run into other people and didn't want anyone coming up on us in the middle of the night, so we decided to ignore those suggestions and find our own little spot off the trail. A little searching around, and we found a spot a little ways off the trail, in the middle of a small clearing. It was perfect. We set up camp, cooked some food, and talked for a while, and snuggled up and went to sleep for the night. Somewhere around 2 a.m., I was awoken by my girlfriend shaking me awake, telling me, "Get your gun, someone is outside walking around our tent." She informed me that she woke up to what sounded like someone right outside the tent, running a knife or something along the side while circling us. When hiking, I carry a 1911 and a judge with me. You never know exactly who or what you might run into when on such a long hike in a remote location. I got the judge out of my pack, and then we sat silently, listening for any sounds. A few minutes of nothing but the breeze blowing through the trees, and then I heard it. Someone, or something, walking in the woods behind our tent. I got the flashlight and silently made my way out of the tent. Our fire had gone out, so it was nearly pitch black, illuminated by only the dim glow of the October moon. I told my girlfriend to stay put while I checked it out. I didn't flick the flashlight on right away, so as to not give away that I was out of the tent. I waited to hear more noises. After a few minutes, it sounded like it was bipedal based on the way the steps were paced. I turned on the flashlight and flooded the area with light. I thought I saw someone move behind a tree. I yelled out and told him to go away and that I was armed. I kept the light on the area with my gun drawn and slowly approached towards the area where I thought I saw the figure. Then from my right, I hear what sounds like someone running away through the woods. I spin and face my light that way, and then from the original spot, I hear someone take off into the woods. There's no way I'm giving chase, so I return to the campsite. I tell my girlfriend about what happened, and I ended up sitting guard outside the tent in the dark until daybreak. In the morning, I looked around a bit for signs of who or whatever it was, and I discovered a boot print in some soft dirt not far from our tent. It wasn't mine, and it wasn't my girl's, and this freaked me out as it confirmed that someone, perhaps more than one, was skulking around our tent in the dark. I kept it to myself because I didn't want to freak out my girl any more than she already was. At this point, we were pretty deep in, and still had 2 days left. That day, we walked a little faster than normal, and covered as much ground as possible. When it came to set up camp, I found a spot near a cliff where we could place the tent in a small overhang, and prevent anyone from coming up behind us. The whole day up to this point, I had a feeling we were being followed. I had no confirmation of this, as I hadn't seen or heard anyone else, but it was just a gut feeling. We set up camp and made some food, then retreated to the tent. I gave my girl the 1911 and I kept the judge right next to me, and I assured her that if I slept at all, it would be with one eye open. After a while, she drifted off to sleep, and I stayed awake, listening to the sounds of the woods at night. I was awake for a few hours, just waiting to see if anything was going to happen. At some point, I guess my exhaustion caught up with me, and I drifted off. I awoke sometime later to what sounded like someone going through our stuff outside the tent. I grabbed my gun and woke my girlfriend, shushing her to be quiet. From the faint glow of the fire, I could see someone's silhouette against the tent. There was really someone out there. I yelled out to them something along the lines of, "We're armed, get the fuck out of here now!" They dropped what they were doing and bolted. I came out of the tent, gun drawn and ready to shoot someone. All our stuff was strewn all about. They had rummaged through quite a bit of our stuff. I walked to the edge of the woods in the direction whoever was out there had fled. There was a creek nearby, and I walked to the edge, where there was a small trail running alongside it. Down the creek, I could see a light. It looked like a lantern the way it flickered. Then I saw 3 more emerge from the other side of the woods. I told my girlfriend to start packing up whatever she could, and that we were leaving now. We packed up everything of value, left the tent and a few other items, and headed back onto the trail in the middle of the night. I kept hearing people talking in the woods and hearing branches snap in quite some ways. I kept looking behind us every few seconds to make sure nobody was coming up on us. It was completely nerve-wracking. If something happened, we were still a long way from anywhere and quite literally on our own, since we hadn't seen another hiker the entire time we had been out here. I really felt we were in serious danger. We had been walking for quite some time when I heard something in the woods behind us. As we rounded a corner, I turned around and saw someone step onto the trail and just stand there watching us. It was just as the sun was coming up and barely any light. I couldn't make out any features, just the silhouette. I stopped and looked at them for a second and asked them who they were and what they wanted. They just stood there silently, watching us, then turned and walked back into the woods. We picked up the pace and kept going, looking back every so often. We didn't see them again, but my gut told me they were still there for quite a ways. We eventually reached the end of the trail and got to where we had parked my girlfriend's car, extremely exhausted. We made it out of the Virginia woods without becoming a meal for a clan of cannibalistic inbred hillbillies, which is what I pictured happening in my head the whole time. I have no idea who they were or what they wanted. Maybe it was just someone messing with us, or maybe it really was a clan of deformed hillbillies who were hunting us. I will never know, because I will not be returning to find out. This happened 2 years ago, August 11th, 2018, and since the anniversary just passed, I thought I should finally share this story. My fiance and I were on the second night of our 2-night camping trip at a popular campground about half an hour from where we live. For reference, my fiance is black. We live in a predominantly white, conservative, and racist area. This is important later. On our first night, we kept hearing noises in the woods around us. The campsite right beside ours to the right was occupied, but the one to the left was not. The campsites are about 150 yards apart, and we had camped here in the same exact plot the year before. Needless to say, we were familiar with the area and the various kinds of animals that live in the woods. The first night, we heard shuffling around our tent. It was obviously something large moving around. We brushed it off and assumed it was just a deer or something. The next night, on August 11th, we spent the day at the battlefields in a town with my family. They had all been invited to join us for the day by my fiance, as a surprise for me while he proposed to me. We stayed with my family into the evening, about 6 p.m, before heading back to our campsite. When we got back, things were really odd. Someone had obviously been in our tent. Our blankets were thrown around, clothes were on the floor, and my backpack had been rearranged and I was missing underwear. But hey, we were stupid 19-year-olds and decided that since whoever had busted in had left and hadn't taken anything important, it was fine and they wouldn't come back. So we set up a campfire and sat out until it was dark, roasting hot dogs and s'mores, smoking cigarettes, and celebrating our engagement. Around 9:30 p.m, we put out our fire and decided to go into our tent for the night to celebrate a little more. Nothing too loud or obnoxious. Immediately after we finished, we started to hear the noises outside of our tent again, but this time we focused on it. We heard clear footsteps, and at one point a man whispering. We looked at each other and our eyes got wide. Someone was definitely walking around outside our tent. We were still and completely silent, just listening to the footsteps, and we heard whispering again. Shit, make that 2 men walking around our tent. As if we had the ability to read minds, my fiance said, "I have to go to the bathroom." And I agreed. The bathroom was up the hill from our site. Most people who were in lower sites like ours drove their cars up to the bathroom. Now here's the part I still get chills thinking about. We got up and were getting dressed. My fiance had just turned on the light in our tent and put his binder on, when a man spoke directly to us from right outside the tent. "What are you doing?" I can't even describe how malicious and menacing this voice sounded. It was clearly directed at us, and he said it with a snicker. He was watching us through the walls of the tent. Again, for this part, we were stupid 19-year-olds, so we decided to just run for it to the car. My fiance grabbed his pocket knife and his keys and stepped out of the tent. He pulled me with him and we ran like hell to the car. I heard footsteps running behind us, and then turning and running up to another campsite. In the bathroom, we talked over our options. We talked about sleeping in the car or driving into the town. Then we had another idea. We drove back down to our campsite and began packing everything into the car. At this point, it was around midnight. We moved faster than I think either of us thought possible, wrapping up the tent with our belongings still in it and grabbing our folding chairs. We were all packed up in 5 minutes and hopped into the car to leave. I jumped out at the end of the drive and grabbed our nameplate, which had my full name on it, off of the post. As we pulled out of the campsite, I saw our assailants for the first time. Stalking through the woods onto our campsite were 2 tall white men. I realized that these were the same men who had been driving past our campsite the whole time we were there, just glaring at us and muttering to each other. One was wearing camel hunting gear, and the other one was wearing a Confederate flag tank top. Both were carrying large hunting knives, unsheathed and at the ready. They turned when they saw our car driving away, and one started to chase until the other one stopped him. I made eye contact with the man in camel, and he smiled a most terrifyingly evil smile at me and shook his head slowly. We drove the long way home, taking all the weirdest and hardest to follow roads, and called my dad so he would know we were coming. When we got home, we told my dad everything, and he shrugged it off as us being paranoid, so I never told anyone else after that. I am convinced, to this day, that this was going to be a racially motivated attack. The campground was not heavily populated, and my fiancé was the only non-white person at any of the campsites. It was no accident that the 2 men who had been shadowing us since our arrival and wore Confederate flags and had one on their truck decided to target the interracial couple. I was a 17-year-old male at the time of this story, and have a decent-sized friend group of both boys and girls. Being just out of high school, we wanted to do something insane together before departing for college, and we all decided to go camping in the middle of nowhere for 3 days. So we had 6 people going: me and my girlfriend Stephanie, my friend Brandon and his girlfriend Kaylee, and Steve and his girlfriend Sarah. We had decided to have 3 different tents for each couple for reasons you could probably guess. Being a former Boy Scout, I was aware of everything we needed to survive for the 3 days: food, water, and other essential supplies. Being rebellious teenagers, we also stocked up on plenty of booze and weed for our fun getaway. So in mid-July, we departed for our camping vacation. After hours of driving down back roads, we eventually find a place that looks secluded, but not too sketchy like some horror stories. There were houses nearby, but not too close. Again, we weren't looking for sketchy woods to camp. It took us at least an hour to get everything set up. While the girls and Steve finished setting up the camp, Brandon and I took a look around while fetching firewood. We eventually came across a cool looking trail. We weren't too concerned because there were houses within a mile's radius, and we assumed that those people had used this trail to hunt, which was big in this area. If you're wondering about our car, we drove a Honda Pilot, which was Steve's, that has plenty of room for us and our supplies. We parked the car rather close to the site, so we had eyes on the car at all times. The first night, nothing much happened. We rolled a blunt and drank a bit, and called it a night. The next day we decided to explore the woods a bit, but Brandon and Kaylee stayed behind to watch the site and spend some time together. We decided to go down the path we found earlier. Around 20 minutes down the path, Steve spots a metal fence. We approach it to find out that it's a cemetery. The cemetery looked old, but there were signs of activity there. And no, not some voodoo shit or cult, like flowers and notes left behind. And beyond the cemetery, we saw a bigger trail that had tire tracks and a half-assed parking lot. We ventured down the path a bit more to spot some deer, then head back because it's getting late. That night, we really partied hard because we were to leave the next day and didn't want to return with extra beer or weed. Now this is the polar opposite of the other night. The other night was peaceful, and we assumed the same about this night as we began to turn in. Boy, were we fucking wrong. Now you would assume that there would have been warning signs earlier in our trip, like a rusty knife on the path, or foot tracks around our campsite. No, not at all. All of us woke to a blood-curdling scream coming from Steve and Sarah's tent. As we hear the fabric being ripped by what we assume to be something sharp, I guess Steve hit the guy really hard with his flashlight and was able to get both himself and Sarah to his car. Now here's the issue. Steve's tent is closest to the car, while the other two tents are closer to the trail. So to get to Steve's car, we had to get past whatever attacked Steve and Sarah. Luckily, all of our drunken shelves were gone, because before getting into his car, he yelled cemetery and it clicked in my head. The trail on the other side of the cemetery. So I quickly grabbed Brandon, Kaylee, and Stephanie and start running towards the trail. I used my phone's flashlight to help see. You might think, why would you turn your flashlight on? Well, the last thing I wanted to do was miss the cemetery and be lost in the woods with the guy who attacked Steve. By the time we get to the trail, Steve and Sarah had gotten the fuck out from the site, and we could hear the guy chasing us, but from several yards behind. We were able to find the cemetery rather easily, and I hopped over the fence first. When we all got over the fence, we noticed Steve had not yet arrived, so we all hid in the cemetery. Luckily to our advantage, it was pitch black by the time I turned my flashlight off, and we all hid in complete silence. My heart dropped when I heard the metallic shaking as if someone was climbing over the fence. The guy had tracked us down, probably due to the fact that Steve yelled cemetery. We all stayed still as we heard the ground crunch as the guy took slow steps. When in fight or flight moments, you are capable of a lot more than you would think, and your brain is put on some super high alert mode or some shit. As the guy approached, I realized I had my small Swiss Army knife in my pocket. As the guy's steps grew closer to me, when he was right about on top of me, I grabbed the knife and lodged it in the back of his knee. The guy tumbled to the ground with a shriek of pain and a metallic sound as he dropped his weapon. Soon the pair of headlights came around the corner. Steve had made it. We all got up and ran towards the car. While I got up, the light gave me a glimpse of the guy. He was tall, bulky, and had the look of pure hatred in his eyes as he clutched the back of his knee, and by his side, a huge machete. I was the last one to get in the car, and even before I fully closed the door, Steve floored it out of there. The girls were bawling their eyes out. We drove until the first house we saw, where we politely knocked and asked for directions to a motel or something. It was a friendly old couple. They told us there was not one for miles. They took us in and gave us warm food and a place to rest for the remainder of the night. In the morning, the man brought his hunting rifle with us to retrieve our stuff from our campsite. When we got there was nothing stolen, but all our tents were slashed up. The elderly woman called and made a report while we were gone, and when we got back, the officers were at their house, and we gave our statements. The officers said there's not enough evidence to find the guy, but he promised to search. We headed home later that day. No one said a word on the way home. We were all just processing what really happened. The police unfortunately never found the guy.